Gemma Baxter, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the MAVlab Innovation Program Manager here at the MAV. I'm currently in the city, so I'm on Wurundjeri Wurrung country, and I'd like to kick off this MAVlab Innovation Talk series by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands which we're gathered on. I'd also like to honour the traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and recognise their continuing connection to lands, waters and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present who carry the stories, traditions, cultures and aspirations of First Peoples and who forge the path ahead for emerging leaders. Now, as I said, I'm tuning in here from the city, right near where Joe is at the City of Melbourne offices, and I know you're probably all tuning in from all over Victoria, so please feel encouraged and invited to share where you are in the chat. You are at a MAVlab Innovation Talks event. This could be your first, it could be your 10th or 12th. We do this every month and we like to shine a spotlight on incredible work and incredible wisdom and expertise across the state. This topic is incredibly pertinent, and very soon I'm going to hand over to my colleague Bonnie Shaw, MAVlab lead and Chief Innovator in Residence here at the MAV, to introduce us to that topic. I will say I encourage you to keep on the I'll put myself on Do Not Disturb of MAVlab Innovation Talks. Next month, we're doing a incredible spotlight on building climate resilience into councils, and we'll be spotlighting Bass Coast and City of Greater Bendigo. And then later on this year, we've got incredible topics from accessible public spaces to design tools to community consultation, all sorts of things. So please come along. You are very welcome to join these conversations. But I'm going to hand over to Bonnie now to get stuck into this topic, which is why you have all joined us today. Bonnie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to welcome you all here for one of our most well-attended MAVlab Innovation Talks of all time. We know we've hit on a winning topic when we see lots and lots and lots of new faces joining us. And this is an issue that has got everyone talking. Data centers. They power everything from cloud computing to AI these days. They are increasingly recognised as critical infrastructure for our economy. And we know that they're also resource intensive, land hungry, and pretty complex to plan for. Across Victoria, councils are experiencing a surge in planning applications for new facilities for all sorts of different types of data centres. We know that many industry bodies are working to establish new frameworks. The Victorian State Government made a $5.5 million commitment as part of their Data Centre Action Plan back in November 2025. And last week, the federal government released a new set of guidance and expectations for the delivery of data centres. But the general consensus at a council level is that we're moving forward without clear minimum standards for energy or water use, with limited regulatory guidance available. And this is a really adaptive path. It's a complex challenge, and many institutions are learning from each other as we go. And that's the environment that we're hoping to create tonight. The rapid push for new data centres that Victoria is experiencing is mirrored in other Australian cities and in cities globally. We know that there are others all around the world that are experiencing similar challenges as they tackle this kind of surge in new infrastructure requirements. Local governments need sound evidence-based guidance to support effective decision-making as they enter into and negotiate these spaces. Managed well, data centres can anchor renewable investments, support digital industries and strengthen regional skills pathways. And we're going to hear some examples of where that's happening locally in Victoria. And also we know that they require significant energy and water to operate. And that once construction's done, there's a limited on-site team that manages them. So they're infrastructure hubs, not necessarily jobs hubs. So achieving good sustainable outcomes for local communities will depend on proactive planning to balance energy demand, land use, economic and community priorities. And like so many issues that local governments step into, the rapid surge or growth of data centre applications is a really complex and challenging area that each council is approaching from its own unique context. And so tonight we're very excited to bring together a group of organisations working across different aspects of this evolving area. First, we'll be joined by Dr. Bree Trevena from ARUP, who will be talking about some of the data center futures work that they've been leading globally around the world. We'll also be joined by Joe Cannington, Director of City Strategy from City of Melbourne, to talk about some of the approaches that they are taking with some of the applications that they're seeing. Fidesz Santos is the Coordinator of Economic Development from Wyndham City Council, one of Australia's largest, fastest growing communities, who'll talk about some of the approaches that they're seeing and experiencing in that context. And then finally, we'll hear from John Petrakos, who's the Manager of City Planning at Latrobe City Council, who are one of our regional councils and also seeing a really interesting and significant transition in their community with the data centre at the heart of some of that. Finally, we'll hear from Shannon Best, who is the Best Manager and Technical Analyst for the CASB Group, who sits with us in the Municipal Association of Victoria. And Shannon and the team at CASB have been doing some incredible work convening and coordinating planners in Victoria to support with guidance and shared collective learning and knowledge around some of these challenges as they emerge. So firstly, a big thank you to everyone that has joined us tonight. Please turn on your listening brain and get ready to hear from some of our leaders in this sector as we jump into this complex, interesting, exciting, challenging topic. And I'll hand over first to Bree, and then we'll have a really interesting discussion at the end once we've heard from all of our speakers. So thank you again. And Bree, I'll hand over to you to take it away.
Thank you, Bonnie. Can someone give me a thumbs up? Are we sharing? Are we happy? Excellent.
We got you.
Hi, folks. My name is Bree Trevina. I'm dialing in today from Gambanga country up on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. And in the 3 minutes between our tech check and when this session started, I've actually changed the title of my talk, which was Data Center Futures, but I've shifted it to what we talk about when we talk about data centers. So Bonnie's asked me to share some of the work that Arup's futures, science, industry, and tech teams have been working on over the past year, thinking about the now new next of data centers, looking beyond individual projects to really think about these as systems, not just buildings, but infrastructure that reshapes places and expectations over time, physical stuff that shows up on land many of you own, drawing power from grids we all use and accessing water that we care about very deeply as community. But I also want to give just a bit of a 101 around data centers and how they work. And for some of you, this will be old news. For others of you, it will be a really useful grounding in what we're talking about when we're really thinking about these kind of quite complex systems, which, attract a lot of focus, a lot of attention. What are we really thinking about? So I'm going to talk a bit about how water, energy, and land use intersect, and thinking about how we're going to talk about this. When we were in our briefing the other day, one of the old adages came up that from someone in our team around the fact that we're not in traffic, we are traffic. And I was thinking about this quite a lot today. I've had a telehealth appointment. I'm regional. I've worked on a resilience project using AI and low orbit satellite data. I've been keeping in contact with friends in other states using memes. Our lives are really this blend of physical and digital. And councils are increasingly being asked to balance these kinds of lives, plus the economic development narratives and practical constraints that come around grid capacity, water security, land competition, and community sentiment. And often when we think about data centers, the benefits are global, but some of the impacts are felt in really quite a local space. And I think it can often feel like data centers have gone from someone else's question to very much a local question for all of us in a pretty short period of time. And while we've had data centers for years, what's really changed is the scale, the speed, and the visibility of how data centers are operating and the type of data centers we're using. You can see from this graph here, we'll share these slides later, don't worry about it too much, but capacity is really trending up in large part based on scale and energy intensiveness from potential demand from AI and advanced computing. If you're a conservative, there's an estimate that these data centers will increase about twofold by 2030. Some more bullish views forecast about 3 times increase. But tech advancements are also making really fast energy efficient water gains, which is great, but it does add to the complexity of demand modeling. Basically, it is pretty challenging to forecast or model data centers, size, scale, location. And council state, depending on where you're sat, as Bonnie said, we're seeing these large complex applications arrive often faster than guidance can keep up. And while frameworks are really fast emerging, decisions are being made now. So it puts us in a bit of a challenging yet often familiar position for rapid change, that we're managing risk, expectation and places while the systems around us are really still forming. There's also opportunity here. We're increasingly seeing authorities, asset owners and operators thinking about data centres not as boxes full of servers or building applications only, but place-based infrastructure where performance can be negotiated. And we'll talk a little bit about this as well across these three interconnected areas of water, energy and land use. So water, deeply local, catchments, drought conditions, competing uses, community memory, they all matter when it comes to water. And as we said, data centre water demand can be variable, it can be really hard to forecast. And councils are often first to hear the concerns about this. So why is water so important for data centres? At the most basic level, data centres turn electricity into heat. Cooling is the game here. Air cooling uses more electricity, less water. Water cooling, often liquid cooling you'll hear, can cut electricity use, but it increases water demand. So this is also really dependent on climate, season, water sources, local contexts. So these questions about water, when they keep landing on council desks, on state desks, they are really kind of tied not only to this broader use, but also to really hyper-local context. And this one we often do as a bit of a quiz, but I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. But when we're thinking about water use, it's often a bit surprising that probably about just over 20% of data centers at the moment are using liquid cooling. So it's actually not the dominant mode, but it is on the rise from things like AI and particularly training data. At the moment, globally, it's just over 500 million litres a year that are being used. But as we said, that is forecast to either double or triple in the next couple of years. Interestingly, the data centre industry itself is really moving towards being water positive by 2030. And that is driven by a range of things, social licence, environmental concerns, but also the fact that about 50% of operating costs for data centres that use water is actually driven by that cooling. So it's actually become a bit of a core business risk. And right now we can ask some simple but really powerful questions about water. When is the water being used for data centres? How do multiple sites add up at catchment level? When is it monitored and shared? And what's the end of life value of water infrastructure? And precinct coordination in particular matters for these kinds of questions, particularly for things like heat reuse or shared infrastructure. And some of you might remember during the Olympics last year, the swimming pool at Paris was actually being heated by heat from one of the data centres nearby. Energy and water are really coupled, and like water, power availability and reliability are becoming really critical questions for data center operators as well as for communities. And we're starting to see some of the tech efficiency gains slowing a little bit here, shifting focus towards grid integration, flexible demand and low carbon energy sourcing, which is good news. At the same time, lots of sectors are electrifying. Data centers that are coming online now are competing with renewables and battery storage assets for connections to the grid. And I'm sure you'll have heard about this in the news. Some of the connection queues are up to 10 years long. So these are really both competing yet integrating infrastructures. One of the differences with data centers is spatial concentration. The concentration of data centers is usually significantly higher than most other rapidly electrifying sectors. So that puts growing pressure on local grids. It's showing up in specific substations, feeders and connection queues. So while global totals are pretty manageable, it's 1.5% of energy demand, data centers at the moment, that local variance is really pretty dramatic. When we were developing some of these pieces, Deb Chikara wrote a piece for us around electricity and data centers, and she was really likening the potential of compute to the potential of electricity for us to lift the floor for humanity when we think about health, education, to do things like addressing climate change at scale. And she wrote, the harder and faster we go into clean, abundant, renewable energy, the more we'll be able to explore and build on the true potential for humanity of having access to networked computation. But that was a really kind of interesting way to frame this, where we're starting to see a moment where data center operators and investors are often some of the biggest buyers when it comes to using renewable energy. Again, very much kind of driven by a dual social license question, but also a requirement just to how do you actually feed what we need to feed. So we are increasingly seeing data center resilience measured that are geared towards enhancing overall system resilience and accelerating the adoption of emerging energy technologies in that space. Lastly, land use. Perhaps the most obvious for local government, landing really directly in zoning, intent, buffers, freight access, flood risk, all of these kinds of things. And as we said, communities often experience the cost of data centres locally, while the benefits can feel quite a distance, and that gap shapes social licence, again, something that our local councils are really feeling on the ground. And if we look at the sector globally, how land use and data centres are operated, it's really quite a patchwork. There's a lot of different planning and regulatory environments, which many of you will be familiar with. I know quite a few people on the call have been exploring that. It's also different economic incentives, community responses, involving climate environments and varying competitions for space. But we are starting to see a lot of movements because of the supply side issues the industry is facing. For example, in the UK government, they've introduced a national planning policy reforms aimed at supporting immediate development of data centres while encouraging longer term plans that identify more sites and suitable cluster opportunities. And Bonnie's talked about some of the movements that are happening in Australia around that already. So while responses from places and authorities are varying accordingly, depending on place, there's real value from a local council perspective in actively planning for data centres and thinking about how we integrate them into long-term spatial and industrial strategies. Australia's got about 3% of data centres. We're in a global kind of framework. We actually rank pretty low in terms of location, but real interest, potential, and opportunity for growth in that space. So while there's no standardized approach, the approach that we take now can very much take lessons from what we've seen happen elsewhere. And in the piece that we developed around land use, Joe Howe wrote a piece for us that really framed this as it's a question of adaptation. How do we actually start to be provisioning to be building adaptively? Data centers have these really long life cycles, these big sunk costs, but computing technology evolves really quickly. So there's real value in thinking about this kind of good neighbor approach to designing for adaptability and end of life value, not just day one performance. And for councils, this can be things like design reviews focused on modularity, retrofit pathways, future heat export, and repurposing potential. We can also expand this to think about how it might play out differently in regional and more urban spaces, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this. Thinking about how it looks in spaces that are effectively the brown or greenfield sites, or inner urban spaces where integration is the game. Now, these different typologies need different approaches. And again, we've already started to hear, and I'm sure we'll hear more today about how different locations and different contexts are thinking about this. But really the message here is that one size fits all planning doesn't quite fit the bill, despite the fact that we often think about data centers as repeatable boxes just going over and over. Setting consistent frameworks where the deal kind of depends on context rather than who negotiates hardest is a really powerful move when we start thinking about how local councils and state government can be working together to create better and more responsible data center outcomes. So I'm going to hand it back over now, but just wanted to reinforce as we kind of move into this conversation, most of these problems and challenges and opportunities in data centers don't sit neatly in one system. They emerge where our systems intersect. Data centers are really flashpoints that make those intersections visible: water and energy, land and infrastructure, global benefit and local impact. So throughout this conversation, I'd really encourage you to be thinking about this in terms of where data centers go, zoning, overlays, precinct approaches, how they behave, the conditions and agreements by which they are engaged in communities, and what they contribute when it comes to infrastructure and public benefit. Thanks, Bonnie. I'm going to stop sharing and I will hand back over.
Thank you so much, Bree, for giving that extraordinary context and for undertaking this amazing project. I've shared the link for the work in the chat, so if people want to dig in more deeper, they can. One of the things you mentioned, Bree, a couple of times was sort of changes due to social license. Could you expand on that a little bit more and talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's no surprise to anybody on this call that data centers, again, have become quite a flashpoint. They've become quite a focus in Australia and other locations for a whole lot of questions that we're trying to navigate and deal with as society about resource allocation, around kind of fairness of resource allocation, how that happens at a local level, how that then expands, and again, how do we start to think about who actually benefits? And you spoke about this a little bit at the beginning in terms of data centers as infrastructure rather than necessarily as kind of job creators. So what does this look like to have critical infrastructure that you do use located in your area, but where you might actually feel some of those externalities a little bit more forcefully? And the social license question is very real. And from our experience, data center owners and operators do listen to it. It's a really important and kind of driving force for them in terms of their license to operate more broadly. So we are starting to see really interesting frameworks that go anywhere from community owned. So in New Zealand, we have some community owned data centers led through kind of Maori frameworks. But we're also starting to see in places like Europe, and certainly we're working on some projects in Scandinavia, where a lot of the conversation is around community benefit. So in a number of jurisdictions in Europe, for example, someone asked about the example with the Olympic pool, that you are actually required to come with a partner and say, we are going to build this data center here, we are looking for a development approval, but we have come with a partner and this is how we are going to be sharing and utilizing that heat recovery. And that is really driven by social license and a broader license to operate, but also an acknowledgement that data centers are a part of the community. They're not set apart from the community.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are you aware of anything like that happening in Australia yet?
I'm less aware, but I have a feeling there's a number of people who are going to speak after me who might have a lot more information on that than me.
Yeah, I hope so. And if anyone in the session does have some examples, please do share them in the chat. Thank you, Bree. We're going to come back to you. If anyone has questions for Bree, please put them in the chat, and we'll come back to them once we open up for a broader discussion with everyone. Next, I am going to hand the mic over to Jo Cannington. So we're going to start smack bang in the centre of the city of Melbourne. Jo is joining us. She is the Director of City Strategy at the City of Melbourne, an accomplished senior leader with more than 25 years of professional experience. Jo brings a deep commitment to fair, inclusive and data-driven planning, underpinned by a specialised competency in the development of housing and social policy, with an expertise at the intersection of community needs assessment, community wellbeing indicators and social impact analysis. Really excited to hear from you, Jo, about the way the City of Melbourne is starting to engage with data centres in your municipality. We know it's a big priority for your Lord Mayor, and I'm going to let you take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you see my presentation there set up? Great.
Yep,
thank
good.
you. So yeah, I'm Jo Cannington, just here today to talk about the City of Melbourne's experience with data centres. We all know they're a big deal. At the city, we're really grappling, I think it's fair to say, with really understanding what the context is in the municipality and how do we best kind of harness the opportunity as well as be aware of the kind of externalities, I guess, that are occurring in other cities across the world. So as Bree mentioned, these are relatively new in Australia from the scale that we're seeing, but they have been around for quite a while at a different scale. So the city's trying to really understand how do we guide and create what we're calling like an urban readiness for data centres. We see them as really important infrastructures for our city, for the state, and we're thinking about, how do we plan for these so that we can be kind of optimising the opportunities that they bring. Our Lord Mayor, as Bonnie mentioned, he's made a range of different commitments to this, and we're really lucky to be working with a real network across the globe, thinking about how cities respond. So a partnership that was formed last year with the C40s network, our Lord Mayor and Phoenix Lord Mayor have committed to really thinking about responsibility of cities around how we look at data infrastructure and how we can create a much greener product. So the states are way ahead, and I think looking back at Bree's slide, it's sort of about 45% of data centres are in the states, and the scale of growth over there is enormous, and different cities are responding in different ways. So some are kind of opening the space to enable this infrastructure, and others are really closing it down. And so we're really understanding what are driving those factors. We're doing a lot of work with industry to understand what are some of the selection criteria that's making Australia popular right now? How do we enhance that? But how do we actually guide that through the process? So this is actually a partnership that the city's building within our organisation as well. So we're really seeing this as both an environmental response and a land use planning response. So we're working really closely with our city, our climate change and city resilience team, and we're looking at kind of how we plan for this from a land use model as well. Just to promote that we have taken this through our council process a couple of times. So we've actually, and I'll put the links in the chat, but we've done quite a lot of background research that we're really happy to share. We had what's called a notice of motion for those of you who aren't in local government across the scene. I guess it's when a council comes up with an idea and they propose that to management and ask us to do work. So we've got about 8 months to come up with a plan of how we're going to do that. Now, that sounds like a long time, but in the space that we're in, that's actually constantly moving. So we're probably going to report on that much sooner. And we're really thinking about what this looks like. Something that's been really important for our team is to really get their head around what is a data centre. So I just thought for the group listening in today, these have been evolving over the last sort of 20 years, and it's really moving from, having a desktop data source where we used to all have, heavy desktop computers where the system and the data was stored on a hard drive. Now we're basically moving, and we all grab our phone and use our phone. Well, part of that drive is, as Bree said, we are kind of part of the demand driving the need for these data centres. So we're moving from kind of tactile, place-based data centres close to where things are into a much more cloud-based model where we want to be cordless. But that then means that the infrastructure has to go somewhere. So that's why we're seeing this increase in data centres. It's really interesting to think about what they look like. They look really different. These aren't within the city. These are different settings across the world, but you can have really big data centres. You can have flat ones. They can look like warehouses. They can look like buildings. Inside, though, they depending on what type it is, they're just a machine. So I think we really want to demyth that the data centre itself beyond the construction phase isn't really an employment opportunity, but we really see at the city that the consequential subsequent industry that then comes from having really reliable ability to store data is potentially a real opportunity to think about. I think we're pretty familiar with this information, but the factors that need to be considered for data centres that we're kind of thinking about is, distance, location, temperature, environmental, infrastructure upgrades. We're really seeing a whole range of different economic drivers, but really thinking about those environmental ones and being across the evolution. So it's not a static industry. So it's really important that we stay close to the industry to understand, well, water was a really big environmental impact. Now it's starting to seem like power is the next kind of big environmental impact. So how do we kind of flip the conversation from these being consumers of this, but to potentially be catalysts for the actual contribution of new industry? So how, if they are potentially, very energy rich in what they need, how do we then think about the flow and benefit for our populations using renewables? How can we actually optimise this as an opportunity and kind of manage and look at that urban readiness? My last slide before I hand over to other council colleagues is really just some key insights, and we're thinking about these under 4 banners at the city. We're thinking about kind of the spatial and land use issues. We're thinking about the socioeconomic, the grapple of sometimes these are quite high land use intensive uses. So for a high density city like ourselves, that can be quite a problem. But we also know that the sector's kind of moving into different models as well. So how can we encourage them to be thinking differently about how they design? Environmental factors. And then ultimately, as local government, we're also really interested in the impact on local context and thinking about how the the structure itself, but the actual activity plays within our city, while balancing the important function it plays in creating opportunities. So, like all these planning dilemmas, there's pros and cons, and our role as facilitators for this work is really about understanding, how do we grapple with that? How do we have fair equity across the city? How do we still ensure that the business sector can survive and really thrive? How do we function as ourselves, moving through using maps and being able to optimize this in a technological advancements that's happening, while still ensuring that we do it in a responsible way where we're optimizing environmental benefits, where we're considering the social impact and potentially offsetting that or bringing the community along. We're really interested in that community engagement process and ensuring that our community is really informed on what the issues are and part of any conversation as we move through that. So I think as we move into the discussion, we'll get into a bit of the approvals, but for those not familiar, sometimes local government's approving these proposals, other times they're going through the state process. For us, we're getting a lot of applications in around Fisherman's Bend. So there's a concentration of applications coming in there, and that's also what we understand is a risk mitigation process as well, by having data centres close by. So if one fails, there's another one nearby. We're seeing them pop up in other locations, and we're just really trying to learn about what's happening in the broader global context, so that we can really leapfrog some of the issues that other cities are grappling with to better solutions in the short and longer term. So I'll leave it there. So there's time for others, but looking forward to the broader conversation.
Thanks, Jo. That's a really awesome overview and a great demonstration of the deep research that the city is putting into understanding the challenges and opportunities at work. I think it's really interesting in discussions that we've had in the lead up to this, that the City of Melbourne's unique maybe in the fact that it's getting quite different scaled projects. You've got a really, really big one going into Fisherman's Bend, and then a variety of other types. Are you any further along to kind of understanding the different contexts or impacts of those in those varying scales?
So what we're learning is there's different drivers for different centres, and so some of the bigger centres that are happening, it also, I guess, it depends on who is the provider. So I think the complexity of the sector is actually really interesting. So you have anyone from like a small provider that's sort of trying to get ahead of the wave and trying to do some interesting things, working at a much smaller scale, or even within existing buildings. So we still get applications, there's still a lot of data centres being placed in buildings, and then we've got these other kind of more AI generated needs, which are much bigger, which have a different function as well. So it's looking like the innovation precincts of our city, so particularly around Fisherman's Bend, are really attracting that because of its location, to be able to kind of utilise, I guess, that data centre coverage. The issues are interface issues at the moment, is what we're really seeing, is the issue between a data centre function and then potentially like a residential function. And that's where we're really trying to grapple with how do you design those, but also how do you integrate them into the city, and how do you, I mean, Bree mentioned the adaptability of them. That sort of is important, and working with the state government, I think, is another really important relationship, because there's an appetite at the state government to enable this infrastructure. So how do we get in that urban readiness and work out where that balance is between what we can ask as a community benefit versus then moving to another state, for instance, or losing the broader economic opportunity.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Next, we are going to move to Fidesz. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you. Fidesz is the Coordinator of Economic Development for Wyndham City Council in Melbourne's outer southwest. Fidesz is an award-winning strategist, B2B specialist, and cultural mover with over 20 years' experience driving innovation across government, business, and community. She currently leads a high-performing economic development team at Wyndham City Council, delivering innovation-led partnership-driven initiatives, including the pioneering Wyndham AI for Business program with RMIT University. And Fidesz is one of our most active members of the MAVlab Innovation Associates, and many of you may recognize her from her star turn hosting the MAVlab Innovation Awards last year. And Wyndham came up in our discussions because it's known to, as Jo mentioned, there's kind of two pathways that these planning applications tend to take up into state government or through council process. And Wyndham seems to be having most of their applications run through council. And so we reached out to the team there, also because we know that they're doing some really interesting things in a rapidly growing and diversifying municipality. So Fidesz, over to you to talk about a completely different context.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And now I'm going to try and share my screen with you. Oh, you don't want to see my chat? Okay. Bear with me for a second. Can you see this?
Yeah. Perfect.
All right, amazing. All right. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm proudly coming to you from the traditional lands of the Bunurong and Wadawurrung peoples. Wyndham, as you know, is playing a growing role in Australia's digital infrastructure. So data centres are now obviously critical to everyday services, as we have mentioned. This presentation shares our experience so far. So that's across planning, sustainability and eco-dev. And shout out to Team Wyndham, who's joining us today as well, and how we can shape positive outcomes going forward. For those who may not be familiar with Wyndham City, it's worth briefly setting the context for you. So Wyndham is one of Australia's fastest growing municipalities. As of June 2024, our population is estimated at 337,000 people, growing at around 4% per year. And obviously that'll increase over the coming decades. And in terms of Wyndham, we are strategically located in Melbourne's southwest growth corridor between the Melbourne CBD and Geelong, and is positioned on key national road and rail freight routes. We sit roughly halfway between Melbourne Airport and Avalon Airport, which has strengthened our role in logistics, manufacturing and emerging industries. Economically, Wyndham is a large and diverse municipality. Wyndham's gross regional product is approximately 18.2 billion, contributing over 3% of Victoria's gross state product. We support more than 114,000 jobs, local jobs, and as of Feb this year, over 38,000 registered GST businesses. And that's a 90% growth since 2020 across a diverse mix of industries, including logistics, manufacturing, construction, health, education, and professional services. We have 445 employed residents with employment growth of 5.8% year on year, which is fab. And we're currently seeing at 39% of Wyndham residents working locally with a ambitious target of 45% by 2040. So this combination of strong growth, strategic location, and economic diversity supports Wyndham's attraction of large-scale digital infrastructure investment, and why getting the settings right here matters. So data centres are not short-term, as we know. They are long-life infrastructure that can shape land use infrastructure patterns for decades. Their growth is being driven by AI, cloud computing, and all those things that we've mentioned previously. What this means for Wyndham is that local planning decisions now have national implications, particularly around energy, water, and land use. Wyndham is currently hosting about 13 data centres at various stages, and this started since 2020 with a spike in 2025 to now, and those approved occupy about 76,000 hectares, 76 hectares, which is a significant concentration for a single municipality. Majority of these, as Bonnie has referenced, have come through direct in comparison to the development facilitation program. And this reflects real strengths for Wyndham, access to infrastructure, available land, industrial land, and proximity to Melbourne. And of course, also present urgent challenges. These are not typical industrial developments. Their energy and water demands are nationally significant, and it means that Wyndham is gaining experience quickly, sometimes faster than formal policy can keep up. So this experience puts Wyndham in a strong position to help shape better outcomes going forward. The bigger picture for Wyndham is hosting these digital infrastructure of this scale puts Wyndham firmly on the map. The concentration of data centres here is not accidental. It reflects Wyndham's strategic location, industrial availability and connectivity to state and national infrastructure networks. Data centres, actually, if managed well, the concentration creates a foundation for a broader ecosystem, not just standalone facilities, including AI-enabled industries, research and innovation partnerships, which we're considering as the eco-dev team, and new sustainability and energy solutions. The opportunity for Wyndham is to shape this role deliberately, so we are not just hosting infrastructure, but positioning the municipality as a place where advanced digital capability, sustainability and industry intersect. That bigger picture framing is important because it explains why getting planning, sustainability and economic development settings right now are so much for the future. Early positives for Wyndham, and this is a contribution from the teams within Wyndham. The engagement with global operators has opened useful channels, even if commitments are still evolving. Some proponents are engaging constructively with council and responding to voluntary sustainability requests. One site significantly reduced water use through waterless cooling systems. Another site integrated a substation into the building footprint, reducing impact on road and tree reserves, increasing opportunities for planting. What this shows is that innovation is possible while still, evolving, but especially when expectations are clear. Of course, there's no avoiding the fact that data centres are resource intensive. As a responsible authority, Wyndham's planning and sustainability teams are undertaking the critical work in assessing the environmental sustainability requirements of these kinds of developments. They have received some voluntary responses with regards to efficiency standards in the designs. The positive outcomes in these areas have been voluntary and small. Recognising the significant sustainability constraints is also an opportunity to advance the sustainability standards and better alignment with climate objectives for this new type of development. So there's room always for improvement, and this is a moving target. So data centres have very specific planning impacts from built form and setbacks through to major off-site infrastructure. Wyndham's lived experience shows that infrastructure often extends well beyond site boundaries. Roads, reserves and corridors need to be planned strategically. Reactive site-by-site assessment leads to poorer outcomes. The lesson is clear: planning ahead at a precinct and network level, backed and guided by policy, effective guidelines and tools, delivers better results for everyone. From an economic development standpoint, data centres are different to traditional industrial sites. We know that they don't generate large workforces once operational, and roles are specialised. That doesn't mean that there's no economic value, but it's value of a different kind. So the opportunities that we're scoping as a team is around skills development, local procurement, and I think local procurement touches on that model that Bree would have referenced, something around the community wealth building framework, which we know there's some really great international case studies around that, and innovation partnerships, so anchoring advanced digital capability in Wyndham. And obviously, Bonnie mentioned the federal expectations as well, so I won't go through that in detail. And then just move to the future opportunities. So Wyndham now has an opportunity to move from reactive assessments to strategic shaping. That includes directing data centres to the most appropriate industrial zones. A lot of them are concentrated around Truganina and Tiny at the moment. And I know that's been challenging for our planning team as well, but there's an opportunity to look at those opportunities. Assessing full operational energy, water and emissions, planning infrastructure corridors early to protect roads and canopy. These steps help ensure growth supports resilience and livability over the long term. Economically, the key opportunity is to move from passive host to active partner. Council can play a role in facilitating introductions to local suppliers, supporting education and training pathways aligned to specialist roles, aligning corporate social responsibility programs with local needs, triple helix collaboration, so between government, industry and academia, e.g. Research, innovation and local capability, which aligns with the federal government's expectation number 5, offering a way to build an ecosystem around what is otherwise a low employment land use. The key lesson is that these conversations really need to happen early before approvals are finalised. So Wyndham's experience shows that data centres bring both significant challenges and opportunity. Data centres are part of Wyndham's future, with clear expectations and better planning tools and early conversations about sustainability and economic value. We can support national digital infrastructure, strengthen resilience, access community benefits. The goal is not just slow progress, and I don't think we'll see that anytime soon, but to shape it well. So Wyndham grows as a place that supports innovation, sustainability and livability together. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Fidesz. Your slides froze a little in there. And so we might just stop that screen share. Gemma, if you can help with that, please, in the background. Fidesz, I think it's really interesting how your team has so clearly tied this infrastructure to a really clear pathway for economic development, and clearly shows a really mature view. You said early on that because of the sort of rapid pace and sort of early engagement that Wyndham's seen, that there have been some early lessons. I wonder if you could share kind of one of the most kind of significant lessons that you think you've learned as an organisation in this process that might be useful to others, if you can hear me. Or maybe we will come back to that. The irony of talking about infrastructure to drive streaming. We will move to John. So moving a little bit further out from the city, out to our beautiful regions. Our last council representative is the wonderful John Petrakos, who's the manager for city planning at Latrobe City Council. John has been an active member of our AI task force over the last 6 months of last year. So we are very familiar with his great thinking and very strategic approach to this kind of work. So John is a strategic planning leader with more than 15 years of experience shaping policy, systems and place-based outcomes across government and the public sector. I can attest that he brings a rare combination of technical planning expertise, operational insight and strategic judgment, grounded in a strong commitment to cities and regulatory systems that work better for people. He is currently the manager of city planning at Latrobe City Council, where he leads integrated land use and infrastructure planning to guide long-term city transformation. Now, John and the city of Latrobe have, again, quite a different context to engage around data centres. And as Jo showed in, I think, her first slide, they've been in the news recently with a big announcement. So over to you, John, to talk a little bit about the changes in Latrobe and the role that data centres are playing.
Thanks, Bonnie, and thanks very much for that very generous introduction. Yes, John Petrakos, City Manager of City Planning at Latrobe City Council, and I think my presentation today will be a bit of a case study of a regional city municipality that's facing economic challenges where the local economy is changing, and data centre investment is a big deal out here, as I'm sure it is for other municipalities. And the other point is Latrobe City is very early in its data centre journey, so loved hearing from Wyndham and Melbourne about their journeys. So just a bit of an intro to Latrobe. For those that don't know, it's a municipality that's about 145 k's east of Melbourne in beautiful Gippsland. That's roughly 2-hour train ride away. And it is the major sort of regional city for the Gippsland area. And interestingly, even though we refer to it as a city, it's actually a collection of four major towns: Moe, Morwell, Traralgon and Churchill. Those 4 townships make up the majority of the city of Latrobe, with a population of 80,000 people. So labour force participation is quite low compared to the metro average. It sits at around 55% of participation, and that's tied in with quite a low CEFA index, so social social and economic disadvantage is quite prevalent out here, where in fact Latrobe's in one of the lowest quintiles in the country. Economic makeup for Latrobe, well, won't be any surprises. Electricity generation makes up a quarter of Latrobe's regional gross regional product, and that's derived from the remaining coal power stations, which still provide 64% of Victoria's electricity requirements. And obviously that will change over time as those power stations are marked to close in 2028 and 2035. Obviously, that poses a bit of a challenge for the economy, but council's seeing this as a once in a generation opportunity to reshape and future-proof the local economy, and particularly to build on Latrobe's traditional strengths. So about those strengths, from the perspective of data centres, Latrobe's has unmatched power capacity in Victoria, given its historical role of providing electricity to the rest of the state. So it has very good grid connection and provides a plug and play environment. On top of that, it is in the middle of the Gippsland Renewable Energy Zone. So a lot of new projects out this way with cleaner energy. There's a lot of water out here, so lots of non-potable raw water for server cooling. It's very well connected digitally, so we're on the on-ramp for the Telstra Aura network. Lots of investment-ready commercial and industrial land that's very competitively priced. And finally, a specialised workforce. And that's the legacy of the former the engineers and technicians from the power generation industry. Those skills are very prevalent out here, and they're also directly transferable to data centre operations and maintenance. So the Keppel project, this is the case study. So many of you may have heard about this project earlier in the year, but this is a $10 billion hyperscale data centre hub. Keppel, the company, secured rights to lease a 123 hectare site earlier this year, and I believe that would have been when a lot of media releases were made. The site is next to or close to the former Hazelwood Power Station, and I looked up 123 hectares just to get a bit of understanding of how big that was, and I got the answer that it's roughly the equivalent of 62 AFL football pitches, just to give you a bit of appreciation of the scale of the site. It will be one of Australia's, if not the Asia Pacific's, largest data centre developments. I don't know too much about hyperscale data centre hubs, but I believe the type of customers that are attracted to this infrastructure is your Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and the likes. My understanding about how Keppel works is they will secure energy and water first, so they'll secure the key utilities first, and then stage out their development, and that obviously includes planning approvals and things like that. The gross power for the centre that I'm guessing they'll be looking to secure is roughly 720 megawatts. And again, for comparison, I did Google this, but that's 720 megawatts is enough to power 500,000 Victorian homes, so it's huge. A planning permit application hasn't been lodged that I'm aware of at this stage. Oh, sorry, that was a fly through of the centre graphic of it. So council's position. So council welcomes investment like this. It offers a lot to diversify the economy, and there is an economic flow on associated with something of this scale. Obviously, there's the construction jobs in the tens of thousands, but then there are ongoing jobs, and my understanding is that the on-site jobs are higher for a hyperscale data centre than is the case for other data centres. And also on top of that, having something of this scale out in Latrobe, it'll be interesting to see what other types of businesses are attracted to the region. Council would welcome direct lodgement of the planning application, so council would welcome to be the responsible authority. And finally, the planning process will need to grapple with what is to be considered and what's outside the scope of the planning approval process. So just to wrap up, when preparing for this presentation and reflecting on our recent experience with the Keppel Centre, and we're in the beginning of our journey at La Trobe, I've got a few opportunities and challenges I just wanted to put out there for discussion from our experience. The first one is there's huge opportunity for state and local partnership. The state government and La Trobe City, we're aligned in wanting this type of investment here. In fact, well before Keppel became public, council played a role to attract this investment. We met many times with the original project manager. There was a lot of information about the planning process provided, and letters of support and the likes. So we're on the same page with the state government with this one. While La Trobe welcomes a planning permit application to be lodged directly with us, particularly for the planning fees and the ability to control the process, we will work obviously with the development facilitation program, as it's likely that the application will be lodged with the state, just because they offer a lot in terms of special planning processes and exemptions and the likes. But that said, like I said, council will work with the development facilitation program in assessing the application, and also once a permit is issued, council is then responsible for enforcing the permit conditions. Confusion about approval. So this is something that we see in La Trobe with large-scale applications. They generate a lot of interest and concern, and sometimes that interest and concern is well beyond the actual project that's under consideration. So there's what we've seen in the past, and what could be the case with any application of this scale, is there could be confusion, or there's potential for there to be confusion in the community about who has authority over the decision making, what is the process, is there a review right, and what is a consideration and what isn't. Lots of people in the community are concerned and interested in energy use and water use, and a question that I have is that something that's directly considered as part of the planning process, or is it handled separately? So clarity on those things, I think, is going to be very important. And finally, balancing outcomes for the community with fairness to the investment. So council's priority is ensuring the community receives meaningful benefits from any major development. A project of this scale brings new economic activity and new rate revenue as well. Beyond the expected benefits, an emerging area for clarity will be what additional community contributions are appropriate to request, what is the correct process for seeking them, and also what is a fair and reasonable ask. I've heard talked today things like sustainable design considerations and end of life considerations being part of the consideration, or what's asked for, but also things like certain percentage of construction jobs to be sourced locally. That's something like that's really important for a place like La Trobe, or support for local education and ICT skill development in our local institutions, which would support the local workforce transition from power generation to new industries, but also for the benefit of Keppel and other data centres, help build a talent pipeline, a local talent pipeline. So there are some opportunities and challenges for consideration, and I hope our case study for La Trobe has been of use to today's discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate you sharing that, and so early on the journey. It's an incredible project, and I think the approach that La Trobe has taken really shows an alternative path that councils can take in this space. One of the things that comes through really strongly when you talk about this is this theme around collaboration. Your council clearly took a very collaborative, open approach with the developers. You're talking about an open and collaborative approach with the state government as well. What's the kind of culture that is driving that inside La Trobe?
I think La Trobe has a very long history of being at that intersection between local considerations, that are impacted by state or federal decision making. So there's and I'm talking about the power industry, the coal power stations, heavily state intervention there, good and bad. So there is just a familiarity working with the state government for these types of big projects. So I guess it's in the culture and the DNA of the council.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So while data centers as an infrastructure are new, that literacy in big infrastructure is at the core of your organization.
Absolutely. Like I was having a conversation with our head accountant, and I was asking, how do we go about like determining the rate, the capital improved value of this site? And it didn't bat an eyelid. But we deal with that all the time with the power stations or with the paper mill and things like that. So there's a lot of know-how within the council that that the state could lean on as well.
Well, it sounds like some of our other colleagues in other councils as well could learn a lot from the experience that you guys have.
And vice versa, we can learn from Wyndham and Melbourne, and yes, yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to go to our final speaker. Speaking of collaboration and learning from one another, it is my pleasure to introduce Shannon Best. Shannon is a colleague at the MAV, where he is the Best Manager and Technical Analyst for the Council Alliance for a Sustainable Built Environment, otherwise known as CASB, a beloved community of practice hosted by the Municipal Association of Victoria. At CASB, Shannon leads the evolution and governance of BESS, which stands for Built Environment Sustainability Scorecard, and I'm sure someone's going to drop a link to it in the chat as I speak, which is a council-designed and built tool that empowers councils to drive stronger energy, water, stormwater, and ESD outcomes through the planning system. Shannon has a background spanning building design, infrastructure delivery, consulting, and environmental design. And Shannon's been leading a pretty rapid response from CASB to this sort of surge in applications, planning applications for data centres in councils across the state. And when we first started talking about doing this session, I think you were talking to almost every single council. And I think together we mapped out an additional 22 to 25 stakeholders across state government departments and all sorts of other authorities that you guys were talking to. So Shannon has been holding a lot. And he is going to share a little bit about that process and what's been happening in the support space that CASB's been providing. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and thanks for having us. And yes, so I'll be telling a little bit that story about the collaboration and CASB and working with all the councils and chatting to others. I guess this started for us for CASB when we were hearing stories in meetings last year, and as an alliance of 44 councils, all Victorian councils at the moment, we tell a lot of stories like we're hearing tonight. And as part of that story, something that was coming through pretty strongly was an acceleration in both the number and the scale of data centres that you are seeing at councils. And since like kind of mid last year, it's like a new data centre application was being submitted every few weeks. And they're not small. We heard that councils were seeing data centre proposals where the energy use of a single data centre was greater than the entire municipality. That started to raise eyebrows. And that councils, and I guess John pointed to one, are seeing data centre sites nearing 1,000 megawatts. That's a gigawatt. To put that into perspective, we know 2 sites at the moment that are proposed that will be bigger than Victoria's current biggest energy user, which is the Alcoa aluminium smelter over in Portland. And when you're in the energy space, everybody knows about the aluminium smelter because it's huge and it has always been the biggest user in Victoria. That's changing. Proposed data centres are bigger than that. And each of those would be around about 10% of Victoria's peak load. So when you start adding data center on data center, it adds to the electrical load pretty big and everything that comes with that. We also heard of the large water consumption that can be used in data centers for cooling, as Bree mentioned, and some proposals they were using the equivalent of like hundreds of thousands of people in their homes. And that made the news, particularly in Hume City Council. So we started to hear that and the calls from councils to work together and to, as quickly as possible, help each other to work out what to do with data centres. Data centres are coming into councils. What do you do about them? Out of this, we formed a working group in November. The active membership of that is 7 councils. And those are the councils who are seeing the data centres coming in. It includes some of those we've been talking today, and also includes WAGA, which is the Western Alliance for Greenhouse Action that covers a number of councils who are seeing a lot of data centres. But the working group's open to all CASB member councils, and that working group's been meeting and has been sharing with each other what they're seeing and what their different approaches have been to data centre assessments. Kind of knowing that they're coming quickly, they wanted to get some clarity and consistency as quickly as possible. And from that conversation, it's become pretty clear that the energy and water use in data centres is quite opaque. Often the operators point to commercial confidentiality as a reason for not wanting to divulge that, which is why, and we saw it in the chat, a couple of those questions about exactly what is happening isn't the easiest thing to find. But we wanted to kind of delve further into that, and so we're doing that. The initial focus has been better understanding what's happening within councils and in state government, and particularly around assessments for water and energy. So we've been collecting data to try and fill a gap and to get clarity on what information is being provided and what should be provided. This is a new type of application for planning permit processes, for planners, for engineers, for ESD officers, and ESD is environmentally sustainable development officers in councils, and for everyone to get our head around, well, how is this similar to what we've done before and what is quite new? And that collaboration across the councils can draw out the different strengths, and we've heard about it from the 3 today. What was clear is that for a number of councils, the data centre operators are choosing to go to the state government for their planning permit and doing that through the development facilitation program. But for some councils, Wyndham being a key one, the data centre operators are still choosing to go to the council for the permit. We want to better understand why. So we're continuing to look into that. And John pointed to it that the planning fees that go along with these applications is significant. And whatever path is taken, councils still spend time and resources assessing them, either as a referral from the state government or directly in their own planning permit process. So ideally, from a council perspective, the operators would go direct to council, and councils would see those fees as well as doing the assessment and enabling the right outcomes. So because of how quickly this problem is emerging, how the pace of applications coming in, energy and water has been the major focus. And we've been looking locally, internationally, nationally, including research like that Bree pointed to from Arup and others, to try and, for all councils, very quickly to get our head around what's happening and having a stack of those conversations that Bonnie has spoken to. It seems that there is new information coming out about what's happening locally and internationally, and different research and different alliances. Everybody's talking about data centres. And I am daily getting multiple wonderful pings from people saying, hey, have you seen this one? Hey, have you seen this one? The vast majority of the time, I hadn't seen it before. It's just a constant stream. Everyone's talking about it. And I guess that's why we're here, because of the speed, and collaboration is absolutely vital. As part of that, And knowing that councils aren't the only part in this, we've been talking to state government departments, water and electricity authorities and network providers. The Water Services Association of Australia had put out a really interesting paper, and we had some chats with them. We've been chatting to tool owners and operators about what they're doing. So there's a Neighbours tool, which is a federal one for those who don't know, and they have an energy tool for data centres. They're doing feasibility for a water one. So we're talking about them, about how we can help, what that might look like, how that can help us. Also talking to the Green Building Council, who looks after the Green Star tool. They're looking at data centre tool, and other research and advocacy groups. And then we've been talking to other councils like La Trobe about what they're finding, and some other councils are coming to us because they see them coming through the pipeline as well and are expecting them to come. And we're here to help, to connect people with other councils who are doing it, but also we're trying to work on something that can be used by councils as a collective. Most recently, via a partnership approach, of councils with Wyndham as the lead, work's happening on determining what the expectations should be for data centres when they're coming in for a planning permit application. We've also similarly been talking to the state government, a few departments about that, and we're hoping that gets some traction, because being clear and consistent is the key for the group and generally. It'll help data centre operators when putting in planning permit submissions. It'll help councils and state government when assessing these applications and for permits, and it'll help the community with greater transparency. And a part of the conversation is what should be reported at that planning permit stage, but what also should be reported ongoing, because we are all about transparency. So if you'd like to get understand more about the working group other than the conversation today, feel free to drop us a line at CASB or through the MAV. And like today's session, which is improving clarity, that's what we're trying to help councils as a collective do, and knowing that other councils are going to be dealing with data centres in the future who aren't seeing them at the moment. So looking forward to discussions tonight and ongoing. Feel free to throw any questions, but thanks, Bonnie.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. And maybe either you or Gemma might drop a link into the chat to for how people might be able to contact you if they would like to. Either you or through CASB and the great work that you guys do there. That wraps up our formal presentations or informal presentations for this afternoon. What an incredible collection of experiences and shared knowledge. I am so grateful for all of you for taking the time to consider how you were going to tell these stories. When things are moving so fast in such a complex environment, it can be really difficult to find that moment of space to pause and actually step back and consider the broader perspective. And I really appreciate each of you for taking the time to do that and to spend some time with us tonight, because this is where we do the learning piece and bring together all of those insights. I was reflecting on some of the comments that we asked you to make when you signed up about what you were hoping to learn here. And I might just reflect some of those back to the group to remind you about what you were looking for. So people said that they were looking to better understand data centers and their real impacts, to understand the role of councils and their potential influence for good, the impacts on council resourcing, guidance and consistency, and strategies that councils can use to embed sustainable design requirements. A big focus on the future. What does good look like? How do we think about not just what's kind of possible now, but what could really good look like? In kind of coming into tonight, we looked at a couple of amazing examples where this infrastructure, similar to some of the examples that Bree shared, are really powering incredible data and digital infrastructure and adding amazing amenity to local communities. And surely that is what we want to see. And John, I think you did a great job of talking about how, and Fidesz as well, economic benefits that this infrastructure will provide. There's a big focus on economic development benefits and opportunities, and I think you both really covered that very well. And I would love to actually follow up with an initial question to you about this kind of really interesting duality or kind of balance of skills and experience that your two councils bring. So Fidesz, you dropped off at the end of your presentation. I had a question which was, you're one of the early councils to engage with a lot of data centers in your municipality, and you said you'd learned a lot of early lessons, some of those kind of hard-won steps when you're one of the first to kind of go through these processes. I'd love to hear some of those, and kind of in contrast, John, like you're kind of at the very early stage of this journey, but you have, as a council, so much experience in kind of energy infrastructure. It would be really interesting to kind of hear some reflections from those two perspectives. And Fidesz, maybe if you could respond to the question first, that would be great.
Bonnie, am I allowed to invite some of my colleagues from Wyndham
We
City
would
Council?
love that. We would absolutely love that.
And Helen, if you guys are open to, because they are the experts from a planning perspective and also sustainability, and I'm so glad they're here.
Wyndham crew, put a hand up, and Gemma will add you to the spotlight.
Sorry, I could say Lachlan putting his hand up, but I was going to jump in, so I'm Tess from Wyndham. But Lachlan, if you have any questions or comments first.
Thanks, guys. No, you go ahead first, Tess. Go for it.
Thank you so much. So look, I am the town planner who has handled almost all of the applications who have come through council at this point in time. So I think we're currently at 8, and then 1 has gone through the DFP process. We have 1 current application in itself, and all of the others have resulted in planning permits being granted. I think in terms of how the market has changed, and I guess not the importance, but just how crucial or how big the potential impacts are, has rapidly changed in this space. So we're looking at kind of 2020 when these applications started to come through, and they were generally like under 100 megawatt facilities. And then, just say across 2021 to 2023, we were seeing the increase, and it was kind of jumping up to around 250 megawatts per site. And now I'm currently looking at an application that's 850 megawatts, and that's one single site. So thinking about, just some figures that I've been given is that represents, over 3% of Australia's entire electricity generation. The water generation is surprisingly not too bad within that site context, just due to the different technologies that they're choosing to utilize. But yeah, I guess the context has really, really changed. The types of applications have changed. There have been some, I guess, learnings or improvements that have been offered by developers along the way when, we really kind of tried to push for change, or trying to see a more transparent kind of community benefit, whether that was just how well the land was actually being utilized. So the example that Fidesz had provided in terms of relocating an open air substation, which was, thousands of square meters, and placing that within the built floor, or well, within the footprint of a data hall itself. So that represented an opportunity for more permeable finishes or landscaping across the site. So a small win. And then, for example, with the current application that I do have, there was, I guess, the improvement in terms of the water usage. So that was changing the technologies that they used to cool the site. But yeah, look, in all honesty, the wins have kind of been few and far between. It's been a very steep learning curve between the last applications processed and then this current one, just due to the scale of it, and how can council fathom, that at, something that's of national significance, potentially global significance. We just don't have the policy to appropriately assess this. And also, we unfortunately don't really have the tools. And I've been involved in discussions with Shannon before from the CASB team. We really need a tool from a sustainability standpoint, how to assess the impact of, the operational impact of these sites rather than that initial build. So yeah, some
Nice.
quick pointers.
That's really good, Tess.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, you touched on some really interesting points there of with the latest scale, yes, they did provide some great feedback and did reduce their consumption, or well, their water consumption component, and say, oh, yep, no worries, we'll, you know, do some work on that. The problem is that we didn't really get a lot of clarity on, well, if you're doing that, then what technology are you going to be using? If you're going from evap to heat pump, if you're doing that, which is what I assume, there wasn't any revision given on the increased consumption of the power, which absolutely would be massive, and that would be significant, and probably push it from an 800 megawatt to potentially over a gigawatt of load. So those are some of the things that, sorry, if anyone doesn't know who I am, I'm Lockie. I'm from Wyndham, and I'm the big energy nerd at Wyndham. But I also am the VCO project manager. So all VCO kids, hey, how you going? Yeah, so I do a lot of the work with kind of strategic energy management at Wyndham, but also a lot of work with sustainability guys, and then also connected a lot with AMO, Powercore, and some of the guys. So I was chatting to Powercore today, kind of at a high level about this, and kind of stressing out a little bit. And yeah, they were saying, yeah, right now live in Powercore, it was 450 megawatts was the entire demand of Powercore's network. And we've got one building that's doubled. We've got one potential application that's double that. How is Powercore going to be able to respond to that? How is Greater Western Water going to be able to respond to that? Greater Western Water are in a similar position where they haven't really got any response until the applications go in and buildings built by that point. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that we need to be kind of get some more information, definitely at a planning perspective of how, not necessarily just how these systems work from a a local impact, but how it works at a more greater level in terms of, okay, well, Deer Park interconnected and down, and then how all the power demand works and the knock-on effects. How does that affect the local constituents, and how does the power then, the stability of our local grid, which is pretty important. So yeah, tripling Wyndham's grid consumption in one building is pretty significant.
Thank you for sharing that. I noticed another friendly face on the call, and so I'm going to do a throw out to the audience to see if Toby Kent would like to put up his hand. And Gemma, maybe you can spotlight Toby. Toby is the CEO of the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. Toby, are you guys looking at the impacts of energy use for data centers?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Bonnie. Hi, everyone. Great presentations. So the simple answer is yes. Are we looking at it only in the context of energy impact? No. I think I'll probably, in answering the question, kind of reinforce. No, wait, because we don't have much time. But what I would say is one of the reasons that the ISC, and for those who don't know us, Shannon mentioned the Green Building Council. The simplest way to explain what we do is that GBCA does vertical, we do horizontal in terms of assessing the impacts of infrastructure, sustainability impacts. And so we're looking at data centers because while they are housed in a building, very much to the point that Lockie and Tess were just making around the construction phase. So yes, they're in a building, but when you actually look at both the impacts in scale and then the function of a data center, they look and operate much more like traditional infrastructure. And so that's why the ISC is getting involved in that space. Under the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act that sits at a federal level, data center is obviously recognized as critical infrastructure. So again, we should be looking at it from an infrastructure perspective. I wasn't actually particularly going to talk about ISC, but thank you for asking a specific question that gave me a platform to mention the work we're doing. Now that I have that, I will also mention a piece of work we're doing with someone I know that you know, Bonnie, with Adam Beck, around digital futures, and that's very much looking at our role and others in planning better for this kind of thing. So Shannon, I'll drop you a note, and if anyone else would be interested in that work, we're really pleased to get anyone involved. Thanks for the question, Bonnie.
Thanks, Toby. Can you drop a couple of links in the chat, and then we'll have it, and our team will be able to do a summary
I'm
and
not
share
sure I
them
can
back
because it's a
with the
work in
group.
progress, but I am.
Any
Yeah, anyway,
links that you can
let me have a
share,
think as to what. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be great. Joe, I have a question for you. You know, we've kind of covered these themes of learning from one another. And one of the things that the City of Melbourne's kind of had this opportunity for is to learn from other countries. And with the leadership of the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, you've integrated the work of C40 and had this opportunity to see what's happening in more detail from other cities around the world. Can you share some of that experience?
Sure. So I have dropped a couple of links in there of available resources that might be helpful for people. It's a bit of a sad story, I think, in terms of like the pace. So I think that one of the common sort of threads of the presentations tonight is just keeping ahead of the wave of development and actually understanding like how to best manage this. I think the biggest lessons we're learning is around trying to get more transparency on reporting so we can actually understand impact. So there's different examples, and I don't know if there's anyone in the City of Melbourne wants to jump in here, and I can maybe follow up with some more information, but how we can get transparency on the actual site information. That seems to be a really big opportunity in other cities. A lot of these developments are worked through networks, and so the actual ability to actually understand well, how much power is being used or how much water is being generated for that specific site isn't as easy to access as others. And it'd be interesting if Wyndham have been able to crack this, but we're finding some insights around how we can look at some regulatory changes. And I think this is where the partnerships work that John's talking about, like how do councils work at kind of, for us, it'll be the M9 scale of working with other local governments, but how do we work as a state? And then how do we work as a country to really look at all the different governance settings that we can really optimise this for the benefit of all Australians? And it sounds like a big ask, but it's sort of where we need to go because the scale of this infrastructure is so big and the pace of it is so fast that we really need to come together at all scales to do that. So I think we're learning of what not to do from other cities. I think Dublin is one that's often cited as when you've got like, I heard when Wyndham were talking about industrial land use being a good location for it, that's helpful when you've got industrial land use. Like we don't have a lot of that in the city, so we've got permitted utility uses for these infrastructures across our whole municipality, and that's what's happening in a lot of cities where they're in mixed use settings, they're in zones that don't exclude these uses. So I think getting on top of the zoning and being able to really guide where these developments happen, but then not pushing them out of the city so much that then they become kind of congregated on the edge of the city either. So it is this balancing act. So I hope when we report back to council, I don't know how we can do this through MAV, but would love to report back our findings and share that with people. But I think the big lessons are regulation, partnership, alignment, working with the sector, because I think there's a lot of, I guess, environmental expectations that a lot of companies that, you know, the good neighbour kind of work that Bree was talking about, how do we become a good neighbour, but how do we optimise the good operators as well to lead the force on how this works, and so then we can lift all expectations. I think that's coming through a bit through some Californian examples that we're seeing. But yeah, I really appreciated Shannon's comment about just the volume of information at the moment. Like you do get a new bit of information every day on what's happening here. So just trying to keep abreast of all of that. So yeah, we could keep learning, hey? Keep learning and sharing.
Thank you so much. I'm going to call time. I feel like we could keep going for at least another hour and a half, but we are at 1:30, and we did promise to let you go and have dinner and have a bit of a relax tonight. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our scheduled speakers and to our ring-ins who joined us from Wyndham and Toby as well. Thank you for popping in there. I didn't quite clock the volume of energy use that was mentioned, and it just took a little while to process there, but that is quite extraordinary. And I do wonder, and maybe if you know of anything you can throw in the chat, but are we tracking the compounding nature of these applications? I know that each council probably has their own way of tracking what's happening in their municipality, but are we looking at what's happening in a compounding way? Because that seems quite large. So thank you, Shannon. We are currently collecting data towards the compounding nature. Excellent. That seems like a really important thing to do. I would love if you have any other big ideas about what we could do, what we should do, what does an incredible, positive, sustainable, high impact data center future for Victoria look like? I would love any notes, any thoughts, any big ideas people have in the chat, because what we'll do is pull all this together along with the insights from this session tonight, and we'll share it back with you because it's absolutely crystal clear to me that these are the kinds of conversations we need to be having on a regular basis about these really fast moving, really complex topics that are hitting hard at a local level. And so again, a huge thank you to all of you for stepping out of that sort of fast-paced context of your everyday into this special precious space with us right now. As always, to all of our council, our colleagues working in council, thank you so much for your service, for the work that you do in your communities every day. It is your work that makes our quality of life possible, and we are incredibly grateful. Thank you to everyone else for joining us tonight. We will make this recording available through all our usual channels, and we look forward to the next time we can meet for another big, challenging conversation. Thank you all.